Meow. Beware, the cat people are loose. I'm Richard.
And I'm Gary, and these are our incredible stories. Hello and welcome back to all of our listeners from around the world and across the United States. We're so happy to have you back with us again for some more incredible stories. And if you are new to our show, welcome. We're happy to have you here. There's always room for one more. And we hope that you like our show so much that you are going to hit that subscribe button so that every Friday you'll be treated to a fantastic new story that can only be brought to you by us, Richard and Gary. So that being said, let's go ahead and move on into today's story.
Oh, and tonight we have a great one for all of you folks who I can never say enough how much I and Gary also personally appreciate you being with us. So you giving some of your valuable time to us so that we can share some stories with you that we hope are certainly entertaining and maybe sometimes even educational.
Yeah.
So
maybe educational. Yeah. Let's not stretch that too far. I mean, we got maybe a handful.
Well, I tell you what, tonight we're going to delve into film history, Gary.
Oh, that's my favorite kind of history.
Movie history. And we're going to be talking about the 1942 American horror film called Cat People.
That's a good movie.
And you and I had a conversation a little earlier today in which we mentioned that, wow, 1942 was a pivotal time for the United States of America.
A lot of transition going on there.
Yeah, it was December 7th, 1941 that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and we entered into World War II. Well, less than a month later, it was New Year's 1942, and this is the year, of course, that Cat People was made, and it was a time when the United States had to gear up, get people in uniform, get them trained, manufacture the equipment of war, and get over there. And so Cat People was being filmed right at this time, which was a turbulent time in American history.
Yeah, it was a time where people definitely needed some escapism because of all of the craziness going on around the world.
Yes. And then I'm not sure when they instituted, the ration books, but it might have been about that time, and Americans had never experienced something like that before. But anyways, you're right. The movies have always offered an escape to people around the world, especially in difficult times.
Absolutely.
Now, this film was directed by a person who was born in France by the name of Jacques Tourneur, and he produced it for RKO. I love the RKO.
Oh, I know. You're a big RKO fan.
Those old studio pictures from the 30s and 40s. And it was produced for RKO by a fellow by the name of Val Newton. That was one of his many aliases.
Val Newton?
Yes, that was not his real name. We're going to be talking about both of these gentlemen, along with some of the main stars of the movie in the second half of the podcast tonight. So you're going to meet them shortly.
Ooh, I can't wait.
Ooh. Now, this film tells the story of Irina Dubrovna. She was a newly married Serbian fashion illustrator obsessed with the idea that she is descended from an ancient tribe of cat people who metamorphose into panthers when aroused. And shortly, Gary, I'm going to, since you and I watched this movie recently together, I'm going to ask you to kind of summarize the plot in just a moment or two. That film stars Simone Simon as Irina, and it features Kent Smith, Tom Conway, and Jane Randolph in supporting roles. We're going to be talking about all of those folks except Jane Randolph. We'll be talking about the others in just a moment. The production began in 1942. Val Newton was placed in charge of developing RKO's low-budget horror film. So guess what? This was RKO's first attempt at a horror movie.
Oh.
Uh-huh. And, Universal was kind of the king of the horror movie department back then.
They definitely had a leg up.
Yeah. But RKO wanted to get involved, and all he had to go on was a title. And RKO executives said, "Hey, Cat People, that sounds like a nice title for a film. Go ahead and develop it." And that's all he had.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Now, it was the film was shot at RKO Studios, and they actually, RKO was a low-budget studio, so they pinched pennies, and they reused some of the sets from previous films, such as Orson Welles' The Magnificent Ambersons.
Yeah, the staircase and a couple other things in there.
Yeah, the staircase, as well as a couple other things, right. Now, during the editing, the film editor by the name of Mark Robson, he developed a technique that was later called the Luton bus, named after Val Luton, the producer.
Yeah.
The Luton bus, and it involves a bus scene, and I think maybe you'll be talking about that shortly, which is called a jump scare. And Luton used that in the subsequent films after Cat People.
Mm-hmm. It's a technique that's used very well. It's kind of like that red heron. You're expecting one thing, but you're given another, and so
expecting one thing and given another.
yes,
That's that's a great definition of red herons and herrings. Red herring.
Red herrings.
Yeah. Cat People premiered at the Rialto Theater in Manhattan, New York City, December 5th, 1942. So we're looking at about 1 year after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Correct.
And at that point, the United States was starting to get up and running in a serious way in World War II. The film was followed by a sequel called The Curse of the Cat People. That was in 1944. 2 years after Cat People.
Uh-huh.
And then there was another movie that you're familiar with. It was a remake in 1982.
Yes, also called Cat People.
Cat People, yes. So before I introduce you to some of the key folks in the Cat People production,
yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the movie is all about?
So, a very taboo movie for the time. Because it involves this woman, this very attractive woman, who falls in love with this gentleman, and it leads to them getting, engaged and married, but she can never be with him, not in any kind of physical, emotional type of way, because she is afraid that if she does, and her emotions become, aroused, that she will turn into a giant panther, and she will eat her significant other. And so it can be seen as she's her husband. When everything starts going on, at first he's very understanding. Oh, okay, we won't have that honeymoon night, and she kind of comes off as being a little bit frigid all the time, though. Her wanting to be passionate with her spouse, and but just afraid of what'll happen. But consequently, what ends up happening is that he falls for another, and so now jealousy arises, and this cat creature manifests itself through her jealousy, and she soon makes the other woman a target of her anger, and things progress from there. But the great thing about this movie is that you never see the main character, who's the creature, turn into a cat. She is only seen in shadow and with sound when it comes to those type of things. The photography is really great, and the sound design is really great for a movie of its time. And it really brings across fear in ways that would be different than if you actually saw a visual effect. And so it's very unique in that respect. And That's kind of the premise of the story. But it's also that she's running away from something. She knows deep down inside that there's something different about her. And then when certain strangers start to show up and kind of remind her of where she came from and who she is, that adds a little bit more complexity to the story.
So without giving away the ending, can you tell us a little bit about that jump scare with the bus?
Well, you really have to talk about how it's shot and the build-up and the editing. The scene that you're referring to is a scene where do we have the names of the characters? Because I'm trying to think right off the top of my head.
I don't have
42.
the characters offhand, but I've got the main stars. But we could talk about the Catwoman. We can talk about the Doctor.
All right, let's see. I'm gonna pull up the IMDb list real quick. Hang on. So basically, Simone, the actress Simone, who's playing the main femme fatale, she's stalking the woman that her husband is now developing feelings for. And so it's happening outside. You have this open area where there's a walkway, a road, and a bridge, and it looks very gothic. It looks very creepy. And you see the two women walking. Simone is several steps behind the woman that she's following. And at first, the woman is very confident. She's walking, with a little bit of, feeling of security. And then she gets a feeling that there could be somebody behind her or someone following her. And so
the
her
audience is starting to develop a sense of dread.
Right. So her footsteps start to pick up. And what you have is this cutting that progressively gets a little bit faster. And you see both women are picking up pace. And the person who's being stalked goes from a confident stride to a very panicked, very rushed pace. And when she gets to the bus stop where she's supposed to be, she's looking over her shoulder, and there's nobody there. But there's these sounds that start to build up. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's a bus that comes out of nowhere. And it's very jarring, and it gives you a little jump in your seat because you're not expecting it. You're waiting for something to pounce on her. You're not expecting the bus to be there.
And that was the first jump scare in the scary movies developed by Val Lewton.
I would say it's one of them. I wouldn't say it's the first. There's been many different types of jump scares, but that's just one unique one. But what's great is after that you hear rustling in the trees behind her, and you can't see what's in the trees or even see the trees, but you hear the sounds, and so you know that there's something there. And then it's followed up later by this guy who has these sheep, and 2 or 3 of the sheep have been slaughtered. And he's following the tracks, and he's confused because the footsteps go from being paw prints from a large cat to footsteps or footprints from a high heel shoe. Ooh. And you see this transition happen from that.
What a great way to show a transition.
Right. So you don't need to see, but you understand, and it's all done through, again, clues, sounds, shadows, and
great editing.
Yeah, really, really effective editing. So you can build up anything with that. There's a lot of movies now that do that and do it very effectively. It's so simple. Well,
let's go ahead then and meet some of the people who made all of this happen, Gary. I told you earlier that Val Lewton, that was just one of his many aliases in life. He was born in Russia in 1904, and his name was Vladimir Levinton.
Vladimir Levinton.
Levinton. So Vladimir Levinton was actually Val Lewton's real name. But as so many foreign folks who ended up in Hollywood did, he tried to anglicize his name, and he became Val Lewton. Now, In 1906, when he was 2 years old, he and his mother and sister moved to Berlin, Germany.
Okay.
And then to the United States in 1909. And here in the United States, he wrote for newspapers and magazines and novels, and even did a little pornography, Gary. So I think I can start to figure out why he had to use so many pseudonyms and different names.
Yeah. Well, back then, some people, and they were really referred to more as like stag films. Mm-hmm. A lot of directors who couldn't get jobs found it easiest to get jobs doing those types of movies because they paid and it was easy work to get. And a lot of people, only held on to doing that kind of stuff until something happened where they could actually make studio movies.
Yeah, and Val Lewton, did you know that he got fired from his job as a reporter for the Darien Stamford Review?
I had no idea.
Uh-huh. The editors discovered that one of his stories that he wrote about a truckload of kosher chickens dying in a New York heat wave was a total fabrication.
Oh, that's not ethical at all.
Yeah, there were no kosher chickens dying in a New York heat wave.
Well, I hate to say it, but that's like people who tend to run out of ideas for their book reports in school and manufacture something that sounds good until the teacher finds out that you didn't do your work. So it sounds like our friend was struggling with stories and...
lack thereof.
Yeah, lack thereof, and then got a little creative and got caught. Mm-hmm. Ugh, not good.
Well, he graduated from overheated kosher chickens to Hollywood. In 1933, he got a job with David O. Selznick. We know all about David O. Selznick of Selznick International Pictures.
Of course.
The man who brought us Gone with the Wind, among other things, many other things. So anyways, he spent many years as a story editor there and kind of a jack of all trades. And then in 1942, RKO hired him to head their new horror unit. And he made a lot of very famous and well-respected B movies. He was able to do them at very low cost and very high profit. So they loved his B movies over at RKO. And, of course, the first one he ever did was Cat People in 1942.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
He was one of the few B movie directors who was able to break into the A movies, the big time. But by that time, he had some serious health problems, and there were a number of other factors. And so he only made 3 A-list movies before he died in 1951. And so he was in his 40s. Gary, when he passed away, he was young.
Oh, that's too young.
Yeah. But here's the thing. When he was working with David O. Selznick,
yeah,
I didn't know this, but he wrote several scenes for Gone with the Wind.
Really?
Yes, he did. Val Lewton wrote several scenes for Gone with the Wind. The director of Cat People, the movie we're talking about today, in 1939, he wrote several scenes. One of them was the Atlanta Depot sequence. Do you remember that one from the movie?
I think so.
All the wounded soldiers outside the Atlanta train depot. Then, just as a joke, this is the guy that writes about overheated kosher chicken, so
right.
His sense of humor was intact. So just as a joke on David O. Selznick, he included an outrageously expensive scene that required an elaborate elevator shot of hundreds of wounded soldiers. Guess what, Gary? David O. Selznick read it, loved it, put it in the film.
Yeah, I know that scene. That's where it starts out with Scarlett O'Hara, and she's on the ground, and she's she's walking. I think she's walking, and then the camera pulls back, and you see hundreds and hundreds of soldiers who are either dead, dying, or severely injured in the scene. And it's a very, how do I want to put it?
Powerful. It's
a powerful scene, yeah, but it's also, struggling with my words today. I don't want to use the word epic shot, but it's
one of them you remember.
It's a cinema. It's a truly cinematic
moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you folks, when you watch Gone with the Wind the next time and you see these scenes, remember they're there thanks to the guy who directed Cat People, or not directed, he produced Cat People. Val Lewton, the producer of Cat People. Well, we're going to finish up talking about Val. He was assigned titles, as I mentioned, at RKO, but he had to come up with the stories himself. And as we know from his early newspaper career, once again referring to the dead kosher chickens,
yes,
he had no trouble coming up with stories. And he hired writers who offered contributions, but he always wrote the final shooting scripts himself, Gary.
Oh, really?
He may not have been credited,
but he wrote the final
But he
scripts.
wrote them, yeah. So he was credited as producer, and I don't think very much. I don't think he ever got writing credits, but he did. He wrote the final shooting scripts himself. And his two most famous films turned out to be the one we're talking about this evening, Cat People.
Cat People.
And then The Curse of the Cat People 2 years later. Now, interestingly enough, he had a morbid fear of cats.
Yes, he did.
He came up with the idea for Curse of the Cat People when he was swimming in a lake one night. He saw some cats sitting on the shore staring at him. He panicked, and he almost drowned.
Really?
Yeah. So although he spent many years in the business and achieved a certain level of success, as far as Val Lewton goes, Gary, there's no known motion picture footage of him, and we don't have any recordings of his voice. We don't know what he sounded like.
Interesting.
Great producer, but we don't know that much about him. We died so young. It is about 46, I believe, or so.
Yeah.
Interestingly, he hated Boris Karloff, one of the big horror
what happened
stars.
between the two of them that he hated him so much?
Well, he referred to Boris Karloff as my worst nightmare. And he actually refused to work with Boris Karloff until he was forced to by the studio. And then he discovered that Karloff hated the horror movies he had been in and loved the terror films that Lewton was doing. So Karloff said, yeah, I hated the horror movies I was in, but I like yours. I like your terror films. So the two hit it off, and they actually made several pictures together. Body Snatcher, I don't know if you've ever watched that.
Oh, I love the Body Snatchers.
Okay, that's a Val Lewton picture with Boris Karloff. And Isle of the Dead, that's another one. You familiar with that one?
I am.
And Bedlam. So Boris Karloff, Val Lewton teamed together, even though they started off as pretty distant strangers. Let's talk a little bit about the cast of Cat People, Gary. The bad guy was played by Tim Conway. Now, Tim Conway went on to play the Falcon, and he ended up in 3 of Val Lewton's horror classics. But he also did comedies, he did musicals, he did 2 Tarzan films, Gary, and even some science fiction films.
Okay, and Tim Conway was who in the movie?
He was the doctor, the bad guy. He was the villain.
Okay.
The psychiatrist. That was Tom Conway. Now.
Oh, Tom Conway. You said Tim Conway.
Oh, Tim? No. Tom.
Conway. Yeah, because Tim Conway is a totally different actor.
Right. No, this is
Tom Conway.
Tom Conway.
Yeah.
And he's probably best remembered, if he's remembered at all, as George Sanders' brother. Now, George Sanders had a little bigger reputation than he did in Hollywood. Now, guess what? Tom Conway and his brother George Sanders,
yes,
they were Russian also, just like the producer, Val Lewton.
How about that?
Yeah, so we had several Russians, or 2 Russians, connected with Cat People. He was born into a wealthy family in the pre-Bolshevik Revolution Russia, and he might have followed his father as a rope manufacturer and inherited several estates, but the family was forced to flee to England. The brothers Sanders, if that hadn't happened, they may never have added their names to the Hollywood saga.
Wow.
But the Russian Revolution did come, and Tom, who was 13 at the time, and George Sanders, age 11, and their sister Margaret, who was 5 years old, together with their parents, fled to England, leaving most of their wealth in the hands of the Bolsheviks.
Wow.
Yeah. And so you would never know it. He has no accent, of course, perfect English.
Of course not.
He played the Falcon, remember? And he's suave, and he's sort of, an all-American type, but no. So 2 Russians in the film, and I might also add that there's 2 folks from France, the director, Jacques Tournier, and Simone Simon.
Yeah.
Simon. Yeah, they were French. So think again in the context of World War II. Russia at the time was trying to throw the Nazis out of their country because the Nazis had invaded Russia.
Yes,
and
they had.
France was under the occupation of Germany. And so we had four people from these other countries deeply involved in World War II. And I've always wondered how so many folks from Germany and Russia and France ended up in the film industry in the United States. But that's a discussion for another time, I think.
Yeah.
So anyways, it was his brother George Sanders, who persuaded him to come to Hollywood. This is Tom Conway.
Okay.
So to prevent confusion on the part of the public, they tossed a coin to see who'd have to change his name. Would it be George Sanders or would it be Tom Conway? Tom lost. So Tom Conway became his stage and theater name. He began working at MGM. He eventually appeared as a contract player in 12 films there at MGM, including a bit part in a movie that you dearly love called Mrs. Miniver.
Mrs. Miniver, that was one that I had to study for the my German cinema class.
At Harvard.
At Harvard, yeah.
Yes, Mrs. Miniver, a very emotional film. And by the way, interesting enough, let's draw some more comparisons. Cat People and Mrs. Miniver were filmed the same year, 1942.
Oh, how about that?
So Tom Conway was in both of those movies in the same year.
2 films that are dramatically different from one another.
Yeah, but he was involved with both of them, which is, pretty heavy-duty bragging rights. Now, his brother, George Sanders, he started getting tired of doing B films over at RKO in the Falcon series.
Yes.
So he started looking for better roles at different studios, and this gave Tom his first big break. So he was the Falcon's brother in 1942. Guess what? That's the same year we're talking about for Cat People and Mrs. Miniver. Tom Conway was pretty active in 1942.
I guess he was.
And so George, his brother, was conveniently eliminated by a Nazi sniper in the movie so that Tom could inherit the role.
Oh.
So Tom Conway played the role with even greater success than his brother George in the next 10 installments, including The Falcon's Adventure in 1946.
Oh, wow.
Ooh. And like I say, he did all of these movies in 1942, and then the following year he did something called I Walked with a Zombie. And, then he started seeing a shrinkage of his major film roles. His film in 1951, The Bride of the Gorilla, was maybe one of his last big film appearances. And so he moved into television, Gary. So this fella from Russia, who was George Sanders' brother, entered TV at a time when a lot of people who did movies didn't want anything to do with television.
So true.
And so Tom Conway appeared on Rawhide. That was one of my favorite TV shows growing up. Adventures in Paradise, and Perry Mason. That was another show that I liked. Maybe not as much as the Westerns like Rawhide. And you'll appreciate this. Maybe you even saw this. He was the ventriloquist, Max Collodi, in an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. It was a chilling tale called The Glass Eye.
Oh, I'll check that out. Hang on. I love
Alfred Hitchcock.
all of that stuff, yeah.
And then he was a regular on the Betty Hutton show. He played the boyfriend, and this was in 1959. And if all of this doesn't sound too familiar with today's generation of filmgoers, here's one that might. He was the voice, one of the voices in Disney's 101 Dalmatians in 1961.
Well, who was he?
I'm not sure. His final appearance was an uncredited part in a movie in 1964 called What a Way to Go. And this movie almost, foretold what a way to go was how he really went. He had failing eyesight at the time. He had prolonged bouts with alcohol, and his second wife divorced him in 1963. His brother George Sanders broke off all contact with him over his drinking, so he was starting to be all alone in the world, failing eyesight, ill from excessive alcohol intake. He underwent cataract surgery in the winter of 64 and 65. And then it was during that time that he was living in a $2 a day room, a flop house in California. So people got wind of it, and so some gifts and contributions and offers of aid started pouring in for a little time. He was still standing tall and trim. His hair was white. He peered owl-like through his thick-lensed glasses at the newspaper cameras. And then his last years were marked with lots of time in the hospital. And his sister-in-law was a very famous actress named Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Oh, I know who that is.
Yeah. So she visited him one day at the hospital. She gave him $200, and she told him, tip the nurses a little bit so they'll be good to you. And the following day, the hospital called her to say that he had left with the $200. He had gone to his girlfriend's house, and he died in her bed.
Oh, man.
Sad ending for this guy who had a fantastic film career in Hollywood. That's Tom Conway, and he plays the villain doctor in Cat People.
Oh, wow.
Let's talk about another one of the stars, male stars, and then we'll talk about Simone Simon last. Let's talk about a little bit about Kent Smith. He's the hero. He was one of Hollywood's more interesting curiosities. He should have been one of the top 1940s, 50s film stars. He was handsome. He was personable. He was highly dedicated. He was equipped with a rich stage background, and he had a lot of talent. But for some reason, all of that did not add up to stardom. He was always kind of a third lead, or, the third person in a romantic triangle. Now, Kent was born in 1907, and in early childhood, he performed as an assistant to Blackstone the Magician.
I know about Blackstone the Magician.
Yes. And he graduated from a boarding school, an exclusive one. It's Phillips Exeter Academy, still in existence up there in New Hampshire. And then, he attended Harvard University. He was on Broadway. That's where he started in 1932, and he had steady work. And for actors, that's a great thing to have steady work. But his film career didn't begin until 1942. Well, guess what movie was filmed in 1942, Gary?
The Cat People.
The Cat People. And he was the husband of Simone Simon. So what do you think of that? And then he returned for The Curse of the Cat People.
Yeah, that movie had a lot of people who returned.
Yeah. And he was also in Hitler's Children. That's one I've seen that most people haven't heard of. That was in 1943. And in 1943, This Land Is Mine. And then he joined the U.S. Army Air Force and was involved with making some government training films. And his career with the Air Force in the military ended in 1944. He died at the age of 78. He did not have such a tragic ending as Tom Conway.
Yeah.
Well, our final person that we'll be talking about is Simone Simon. She's, of course, the female lead of the Cat People. She was a small person, diminutive. She was fiery tempered. She was born in France. She spent much of her childhood, though, Gary, in Madagascar.
Really?
Yeah.
Why was that?
I'm not sure. Well, her father managed a graphite mine, so I think...
That explains it.
I think that's probably the reason. But she started as a dress designer and fashion model. Ooh, that fits the character in the Cat People, doesn't it?
That's pretty much the character in the Cat People.
And she was occasionally in some stage musicals. And then she was in a French film that was directed by Jean Renoir. And she got discovered by Darryl F. Zanuck in 1936 at 20th Century Fox.
Oh, wow.
But her best work was Cat People in 1942. And I tell you what, it's interesting to note. I'd love to go back to history, Gary, when we're talking about films from those days.
Yeah.
During the production of Cat People, she was under FBI surveillance.
Oh, why was she under FBI surveillance?
Now, this is World War II, and she was under FBI surveillance because she had a relationship with a guy named Dusko Popoff.
Okay.
And it turns out he was an MI5 British spy.
Oh.
I think he was actually a double agent.
Oh, no, not a double agent.
Yeah, the Germans thought he was working for them, and the British thought he was working for them. And folks, you'll have to check out your history to see who he was really working for. But in any event, his relationship with Simone Simon brought her to the FBI's attention. After a couple more less successful films at RKO, including Curse of the Cat People, she returned to France for good. Interestingly, also, this past week I watched a movie called Rhapsody in Blue. It was filmed in 1945, black and white.
Yeah.
And it was the biop of George Gershwin.
Yeah.
It was a biopic movie about George Gershwin, the famous composer who did An American in Paris and Rhapsody in Blue. Yep. And some of the Gershwin scholars suggest that his piece called Love Walked In was written with Simone Simon in mind.
Oh.
Because in 1991, in an interview, she talked about it, and she said, above anything else in the relationship, Gershwin and I shared a common interest in music. So she was one of Gershwin's lady friends.
Oh.
I don't believe George Gershwin never married, but she was.
Oh, no, he was married.
Was he?
Yeah, because we had one of our mutual friends knew Gershwin's son.
Okay. So anyhow, she was one of his lady friends. And so she's got a connection with a spy, with a famous composer. And by the way, talking about that spy, Popoff, Dusko Popoff, there was a fellow working in the British intelligence services who knew all about Dusko Popoff, and he started dabbling in writing fiction. And he wrote some stories about a British secret agent, and he actually molded that British secret agent after a lot of Dusko Popoff's characteristics. And the man I'm talking about is Ian Fleming, and his fictional character was who, Gary?
James Bond.
James Bond, yeah. What a thread of connections weaving out from Cat People of 1942.
Oh, I know, right?
Yeah. One last one that I have to talk about is Dynamite. Dynamite is also known for his appearance in Cat People, as well as the Leopard Man in 1943. Do you know what part Dynamite played?
Dynamite was the leopard at the zoo.
Yeah, well, he's not a leopard. He's a Black Panther.
Oh,
or was a
sorry,
Black
Panther.
Yeah, and so he was used in both of those movies. He was a Black Panther, not a leopard, even though he appeared in The Leopard Man. And guess what? He was trained for Cat People and The Leopard Man by a man by the name of Mel Kuntz, an animal trainer by the name of Mel Kuntz. Do you know who else Mel Kuntz trained?
I don't know who.
Jackie, the MGM lion.
Oh, the one that roars in the MGM logo.
Yeah. So Dynamite has a connection to Jackie, the MGM lion. And Dynamite is part of the Cat People movie. Folks, I'm telling you what. Go out and find a copy of the Cat People and watch it. I guarantee you'll be highly entertained. We talked about the Luton bus scare, and like Gary said, there's a lot of off-screen noises that often turned out to be a startled, harmless cat, but they would scare the audience nevertheless. And I think it's a movie well worth watching.
Oh, I agree 100%.
Now, Gary, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to share a secret. Next week, we are going to have the incredible film historian who did the DVD commentary for both Cat People and The Curse of the Cat People.
Pretty exciting. And I'm sure he'll be able to give us a little bit more insight into the movie.
Yes, plus a lot of other insights, because I'm telling you what, folks, do not miss our episode next week, because it's going to be something that will blow your minds.
Absolutely. But until then,
I'm Richard.
And I'm Gary. And this was a very interesting story.
Incredible. Super incredible. Delightfully incredible.